Hi, I'm Jayce, and today we're going to talk about Star Wars. Just kidding, we're going to talk about cognitive science. But since I already told you we were going to talk about Star Wars, I'll just leave this to play on the side over here. I'm going to talk to you about what our group discussed on our first meetup. We decided to meet up at a Monte Coffee on Baseline. If you haven't been there, you should try it out. It's really good. We started talking about the Meno. This got us thinking about innate knowledge versus acquired knowledge. The way Socrates approaches the question, what is the definition of virtue, really makes the reader believe that Socrates was born with knowledge. At this point, our group started questioning both possibilities of innate knowledge versus acquired knowledge. If it is the case that we are all born with innate knowledge, can anything really be created or discovered? In what way could humanity's knowledge move forward? And further, we wondered where the boundaries of human knowledge could be. On the contrary, if the only way we learn is by acquiring knowledge, where do these new ideas come from or originate from? If nothing was there to begin with, how do you get something from nothing? Also, how do you know when your knowledge really expands or if it was something that was previously known before? We eventually started discussing the Chinese room and language. For instance, does translating something alter the meaning of what was said? Are we getting the full meaning of words when they're translated? How much information is altered through translation? We were unable to reach a conclusion. That was the gist of our first coffee meetup, and here's Kylie to tell you about our second one.
During the second coffee shop meeting, we spent most of the time discussing infant and child psychology. We began by talking about the legitimacy of basing infant experiments on the looking time of the children. This led into a conversation around babies looking longer at familiar faces. Some say infants are born with a sense of culture, and back that up with the fact that infants appear to prefer those who most resemble themselves. Another experiment that we talked about in our meeting was the reflex babies have to copy the facial movements of the person they are looking at. This observation regarding newborns was referenced in class and pertains to the way babies will notice someone sticking out their tongue and will in turn stick out their own tongue. We also discussed the helper-hinder experiment that was mentioned in class. In this experiment, even 3-month-old babies tend to reach for the object that helped the ball roll up the hill. We think this is strong evidence in support of the idea that babies are born with certain innate morals. In other words, the preference for kindness is something that members of our species are born with, not something that needs to be taught over time. After spending the majority of the time discussing the oddities of the child's brain, the conversation turned to quantum physics and how it could take society closer to the goal of achieving true AI. Right now, it's difficult to imagine AI becoming commonplace since there is so much more that goes into human decision and thinking other than logic. Overall, the second coffee house meeting was a stimulating conversation among good company.
For our last coffee house meetup, we focused mainly on the topics of memory and attention. We started our discussion with talking about the idea of fear conditioning and how fears are learned by an association made between a negative stimulus and an experience. These associations can cause you to feel scared when engaging in a familiar situation by reminding you of how you felt the last time you encountered that experience. We then dove into the topic of people who can't forget and how they can make use of specific spatial strategies by engaging their hippocampus in order to give them amazing memory. We found it interesting that people could increase their memory so well that they're actually able to enter tournaments and compete for this sort of thing. The last part of memory that we touched on dealt with amnesiacs. We first talked about my man Clive Waring and how he could remember his wife despite his illness. We found this very interesting because it shows how some memories or experiences can be so powerful that they can persist in the brain even after severe damage has been done to it. The What Makes You Full experiment done with amnesiacs led us to realize how prevalent our mind is in our daily life and how it can alter our perceptions of things like if we're full or how we feel about our looks by utilizing different brain functions like memory. Our conversation then switched over to the topic of attention. We first talked about the idea that attention spans of today are worse than they were in the past. We argued that due to technology allowing things to be done so quickly, we have been somewhat programmed now to never want to wait for anything. The last thing we discussed was the idea that depending on what you know will influence what you see. We referred to an image from class that showed 6 faces all with a caption, and that people acted negatively towards the guy with a negative caption for days afterwards because their minds are using what they know to associate a negative feeling towards that face. And that wraps up our third coffee house meeting.